What a lovely reception. Thank you very much. I know what you're all thinking. Thank God there's a go-to-market transformation consultant in the house. We can all breathe a little bit easier now. No, seriously, I love doing this stuff. I will tell you one thing. On the off chance that my 80-year-old mother comes in from the Chicago suburbs and walks through that door, this is a cardiology convention, okay? If anyone has a stethoscope, that would be really helpful as well. Anyway, I am thrilled to be here today to talk to you about something I know we all care an awful lot about, and that is making our channel partner reward programs as effective as possible. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, I want to go through a quick definition. So a channel partner reward program compensates channel partners with tangible compensation or recognition for creating value in a manner that aligns with the supplier's objectives. And here's a really important point I want to make before we go too much further. Nobody out there's got a perfect channel partner reward program, so seriously, it's a constant evolution, it's a journey, and it's a journey of learning and improvement. So as I'm going through some best practices today, please don't sit there thinking, oh no, we're not doing that. So instead, think of it as a way to identify areas where you can improve and knowing that not everyone gets everything right. Okay, so we're going to get into a lot of detail about specific tactics and strategies, but at its heart, what we're really striving for with our channel partner reward program boils down to two key concepts: reward effectively and engage. And if everything we do ladders back to those two concepts, we're on the right track. So just to clarify a couple terms that I'm going to be using, when I say supplier, I'm referring to the company that originates and manages the reward program. So that could be a manufacturer, a software developer, really anyone that relies on partners to get to the market. And when I say channel partner, I mean the supplier's trading partner that is one step closer to the end user than the supplier in the value chain. So think of your dealers, resellers, distributors, agents, the folks on the front lines talking to your customers. Now, when I think about highly effective channel partner reward programs, I think about programs that engage partners in a way that exhibits 7 key characteristics. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk about each of these 7 key characteristics in order. But by the way, this is not intended to be a complete list of everything you need to know to build a channel partner reward program. It's just some highlights of areas in which I've seen some challenges. So let's start with the idea of being strategically aligned. So I'm going to spend the least amount of time on strategy, but I mention it because you can't have a strong commercial program unless you have a strategy that's solid enough to build on. So most clients hire me to help them with their commercial programs, so things like distributor reward, pricing and configuration, and sales effectiveness. But whenever I'm hired by a new client, one of the first things I do is I interview a handful of executive, product management, sales, and marketing employees, and I ask them questions like, why do people buy from your company? Or what are your strategic objectives? And when I get a bunch of weak or inconsistent answers, I know we have some foundational strategy work to do before we can build a strong commercial program, including channel partner reward programs. So a go-to-market question that I like to ask that builds on top of company strategy is, why do you sell indirectly and what do you expect of your channel partners? And I often don't get straight answers to this why question either. And again, you need to know all this stuff because building commercial programs have to be built on top of strong strategy. If you don't know where you're trying to go or why you're going there, doesn't matter how good your channel program is, it won't get you there. Okay, so enough on strategy. I want to go much further into the weeds when I talk about what it means to have a standardized channel partner reward program. So a few years ago, I was working with a $500 million industrial manufacturer of highly technical industrial consumable products. So they sold through about 100 different non-exclusive local distributors and one large national distributor that essentially acted like an online cataloger and sold over the web. So they started by putting a chart that looked a lot like this in front of me. They said this represents sales through distribution for the last 12 quarters. The sales of our local distributors, represented by the blue bars, are stagnant, while the national sales, represented by the orange bars, are growing like gangbusters. We want you to figure out what the national distributor is doing so well and help us do whatever that is with the local distributor. So I said, okay, that sounds like a fun project. So in my data request, I asked for all the agreements for every distributor. So 2 things really stuck out to me after I reviewed them all. So first, there were significant structural differences in the programs across distributors. So like things that were rewarded in one distributor's program weren't even in another program. Not a ton, but enough to make a difference in net price. Secondly, there were components that clearly rewarded larger players disproportionately, simply for being larger. So unfortunately, given the way everything was constructed and a long time horizon over which all these agreements were put in place, seeing these two issues was actually really difficult without doing this comprehensive analysis. But it turns out that the large national distributors contract gave them a net price after discounts and rebates that was about 15% less than the typical local distributor. Now, these were high dollar items, right? The differences were significant and they didn't go unnoticed. So the larger distributor was able to take share simply by offering the market lower prices on the same repeat purchase products they were buying from local distributors. They didn't have a superior value proposition, just better pricing from my client. So we designed a program that didn't reward size and was the same for every distributor. So that didn't mean that every distributor qualified for every part of the program, but they had the capability to do so. So before we launched the program, we scheduled an in-person meeting with a large distributor to explain the planned change, which would increase their net pricing significantly. When we met and we explained the new program, they said, look, we understand that you need to do what's right for your business. And as your partners, we're here to help you and support you in any way we can. Yeah, I'm just kidding. They were furious. They were furious. So they told us that if we went through with this program, a standardization plan, we'd be upsetting our biggest customer, and we could expect them to de-emphasize our products. We responded that we viewed them as a partner, not a customer, and that there's a big difference. But we understood there would be behavioral changes on their side as a result of the standard program going into place. We did it anyway. So here's an illustration of what the 12 quarters after the change looked like. So yes, the sales from the national distributor actually shrank a little bit, but business from the network grew overall, right? So getting this outcome wasn't easy. It took a lot of work, tons of design workshops, many conversations with and pushback from distributors, and lots of financial modeling. But the company also increased its average margins and reduced the complexity and cost associated with managing the program because standardization reduces workload once it's in place, right? But probably the most important thing is that they decreased the amount of leverage that any single partner had over them. So this varies by business, but when you have an individual partner that represents more than 10% or so of your revenue, you don't have as much control as you need to have, right? Okay. So of course, not all these standardization efforts succeed, and the most common root cause for these failures is a lack of leadership. So vision is critical, as is putting the right team in place to get there, and a willingness to make hard decisions that may not wind up with perfect results and may upset some people. And then sometimes you have to be willing to get creative. So here's an example of what I mean by getting creative. I have a different manufacturing client that had channel reward programs that varied significantly across partners, and my mission was to standardize them. So several of their larger distributors and buying groups had what they referred to as non-negotiable. So usually it was some low single-digit $1 rebate that was for some specific but often dubious reason. So an example customer requested component might be a 3% $1 marketing fund that all suppliers have to pay into. So when you're faced with something like this, you really only have 3 suboptimal options. So number 1, tell them you won't do anything outside of your standard program and decline to do business with them if they insist. Number 2, simply make a concession and add it to your standard program for that single partner. Or lastly, accept it for the partner, but adjust the standard program for them somewhere to compensate. So if you have the leverage, number 1's the best. Unfortunately, I find most of my clients do not have this kind of leverage or enough current business to pull this off. I don't like number 2 because you're simply giving away margin and potentially providing that partner with an opportunity to use price to steal business from other of your partners. I like number 3 when you can't do number 1. And let me show you the way we typically do that. So this is a typical net pricing sequence or a waterfall. So we have a starting price, sometimes called list price, and user price, MSRP, something like that. And from there, we take off the base discounts that every channel partner gets just for being a channel partner. And then we take off any earned or variable discounts they might get for doing something specific in our standard program, and that results in an invoice price. So from there, any rebates earned from the standard program results in a net price. So that's one simplified way of looking at a pricing sequence or waterfall. There are other ways of looking at it, but they usually wind up being conceptually similar to that. So as an illustration, same waterfall down the left-hand side. So as an illustration, we have a product with a starting price of $100. And using the standard program, base discount for this product category is 20%. And the earned discounts we expect them to get are 5%, and we expect them to earn an 8% rebate. But this partner insists on receiving that 3% $1 rebate for its marketing fund. So here's what we do. We add that in right here, and then we adjust the base discount for this product category to get the same net price result, right? So one key to making this work is you have to first confirm or negotiate these special components, then reveal the invoice price after you know how you need to change the base discounts. But what we're really doing is balancing off these non-negotiable $1 rebate with an invoice price increase. So it may seem like a lot of work, but if you've got a few hundred of these, a few hundred channel partners, you're typically only doing this particular thing for a handful of them. And some of those might be structured similarly. Okay? By the way, I've seen some situations in which suppliers add in a requested component and then either swap out or diminish their standard components. If you design your standard components well, that probably interferes with your desired outcome, unless the two components are extremely similar. Okay? So as I'm hoping you're gathering, keeping the program as standardized as possible across channel partners is really important. Non-standardized programs tend to become more unstandardized and more problematic over time. Okay, so let's now talk about the idea of being motivational. So the reward portion of channel programs is typically built on a number of standard components, which are things that are measured and then rewarded. So I tend to put channel reward components into one of two categories, drivers or outcomes. So drivers represent things that we want channel partners to do because we believe they will result in better outcomes. So some examples written up here on the side, there's lots of them, but there are plenty of possibilities. As an illustration for my clients that sell highly technical products, I often suggest putting a certification program in place and rewarding partners for getting their team certified, because that's likely going to equip these partners' salespeople to sell more effectively and with less effort from my client. So here's a highly simplified version of what those policy mechanics might look like. Okay? There's lots of different drivers that we could motivate in an infinite way of setting up the mechanics. But the idea is putting these driver mechanisms in place creates an incentive for the partner to create value in a way that they would be less likely to happen if they were not in place. Right? By the way, one of the biggest mistakes I've seen suppliers make is instead of rewarding drivers, they simply put them in the contract. So it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll just say in the contract they have to get certified or they have to give us point of sale information. Well, that sounds great in theory, but if they don't do it, then you only have three options. Cancel the contract with them, ignore the issue, or nag them about it. And all of those options stink. Okay, so outcomes are things that we want channel partners to achieve, like a certain purchase level. So outcomes are typically easier to measure than drivers, but can be harder to know whether they are actually motivational. So for a number of years, I worked for one of the large breweries that are required by most US states to sell their beer through distribution. Yes, it was a lot of fun. I'll never forget at one annual distributor meeting, the distributorship that won the award for the highest sales growth was the one from Southern California. And they received a very nice reward, and the brewery team that worked with them also got nice bonuses. So after the meeting, I asked the brewery's local sales manager, what was the secret to being so effective in with all these programs that we had designed? And I expected him to say that, oh, we learned like a new way to engage with our distributors, and we came up with some kind of marketing program. But his answer was a little simpler. This summer was much hotter than last in LA. When it's hotter, people drink more beer on the beach. That was it. Right? No one, including the distributor, did anything special to achieve the sales growth. If it had been a cold summer in LA, no one in this territory would have gotten anything, right? Should they have rewarded that outcome? I don't know. I do know there are things that I'd pay for before I'd pay for that, right? So the more control a partner has over an outcome, the more motivational the reward component will be. So similar to driver components, I like outcome components that reward actions that would not have happened without the component, right? So those might be components that focus on a specific set of product categories. So for example, if your partners do a really good job of selling your shirts, pants, and hats, but they don't sell your gloves, reward them for selling gloves. Right? Or it could be by a particular customer segment. If your partners don't sell into medical, create a reward for selling into medical. right? In other words, we're looking to put, these would be components that reward partners for changing their behavior in a way that would not happen without the component versus something that might randomly happen anyway, okay? I have another client that started off by selling products in a very focused set of categories. And over the last decade or so, they've been growing by acquiring companies that offer products in adjacent categories in an effort to sell a more robust portfolio, right? So, but their challenge is they sell exclusively through distribution, and the distributors tended to buy only a limited number of product categories from them. Now, these distributors tend to buy all these categories. They just buy them from other suppliers. So our challenge was to figure out how do we expand the number of categories that the distributors are buying from my client. So all else equal, my client would rather a partner purchase $100,000 in 5 categories than $100,000 in 1 category, because their underlying strategic hypothesis is that more categories purchased equates to more loyalty and more revenue growth, right? So we designed an end-of-year outcome rebate that rewarded channel partners for purchasing more categories from my client. And it looks something like this with a few threshold rules, right? The more categories purchased, the larger the payout. Okay. So, because while a partner can't 100% control how much of each category they're going to need, they have full control over which product categories they buy from which supplier. Okay. All right, let's talk about the idea of simple and mutually beneficial. So, and I want to start with the discounts versus rebates discussion. You'll remember the generic pricing waterfall I showed you before. I tend to prefer this version in which there are no earned discounts. So everybody in the standard program pays the same invoice price, and all the variability comes through earned rebates, right? And there are 3 primary reasons that I prefer doing everything as an earned back-end rebate versus a discount. So first, suppliers can be sure something was actually done before paying for it, right? Second, relationship-wise, it's a lot easier to not pay a rebate than it is to take away a discount, right? And third, rebates can more easily apply to a relationship more broadly versus a discount tends to apply mostly to a transaction. So like, it would be kind of strange to do a growth discount, although I've seen companies do it, right? So, of course, your partners may prefer discounts over rebates, usually for the opposite of the reasons I just gave you, or for cash flow reasons, or for trust reasons, so you have to account for that. A few times I've built programs that start as heavily discount-oriented, but they transition to being mostly rebate-oriented over time. We wanted to manage the increases to the invoice and not hit people with huge price increases all at once. So one last thing I want to mention on the rebates versus discounts discussion. While it matters whether you choose to utilize a rebate versus a discount, it's more important that you're rewarding the right underlying behavior. Okay. I think he said that. I'm not 100% sure. So now, whenever you want to deploy a new program, it needs to be explained to the channel partners, and that can be difficult. So besides the fact that the program might change a channel partner's net price or make them less competitive versus other channel partners, the main piece of pushback I typically get is something like, I don't want to have to do all this stuff. You've made this too complicated. Just keep me at our current pricing and we'll be fine. So assuming we have kept this relatively simple, my counter is typically something like this. Yes, there's a bit of math here, but those details are for our back office. And we'll track all that and we'll make it visible, right? But the program is simple. If you get your team certified, take us out to see customers, give us point of sale information, and grow your strategic product sales, your net pricing is going to be roughly the same or better than it is now. Is there anything we're asking you to do that isn't mutually beneficial for our partnership? And that usually quiets the pushback, provided that net pricing isn't changing too much. Okay, let's talk about the idea of alignment with pricing. And I'm going to start by talking about some things that I think a lot of you already know, but bear repeating. So I'd say that half the time that clients ask me to help them with pricing strategy, I tell them we need to fix their pricing model first, because we would have a lot of trouble implementing a new strategy with the model they have. So ideally, every product has exactly one specified price, that's the list price or the starting price, and then a set of broadly applicable rules and hierarchies are used to calculate invoice prices across customer and product hierarchies for both direct and indirect sales. So most distributor reward programs rely on discounts and rebates subtracted from some kind of starting price, right? So getting that starting price right really matters, and that's because a channel partner's gross margin is the difference between the actual sales price to their customer and the net price from their supplier after discounts and rebates. And in theory, what we're doing is we're framing the discounts and rebates in a manner such that the partner makes the right amount of margin for what they're bringing to the table, right? And if you don't have a handle on that starting price, the channel partner program is going to be suboptimal. Okay. Also, if you've got a mixed model in which you sell directly to customers but also sell through the channel, it's important to align those discount and rebate practices such that it's difficult for purchasers to arbitrage channels to get better pricing. Okay. All right. That's the obvious stuff in pricing. I want to talk about the contentious stuff a bit more. I advise my clients to minimize negotiations and concessions as much as possible. So if you find that a significant percentage of your transactions are the result of negotiations or concessions, you might have something wrong with pricing. So especially when you sell through the channel, a constant willingness to negotiate only promotes more negotiation, but sometimes it makes sense. So special pricing agreements are agreements given to channel partners to lower pricing for a specific reason. So typically it's for a specific single customer of theirs that has unique circumstances. The most common reason is we think they're going to buy an awful lot and we need to be more competitive, right? That's the most common reason. So many companies have processes and tools in place for this, but their business practices are lacking. So I'm going to talk through 5 best practices for getting the most out of your special pricing agreements. So number 1, set strategy and decision criteria in advance. So before a SPA request is even made, you should know whether and how much of a price concession you're willing to offer based on various factors. So deal size is an obvious criterion, but other elements such as product mix or competitive landscape may also enter into the equation. You establish these guiding principles in advance to reduce subjective decision making. A common pitfall I've seen is exceeding guidelines because an account is deemed strategic, usually by salespeople. It's sort of like, oh, it's critical that we're in this account. It's so visible and it's going to lead to other good things. It's not just about this sale, right? Maybe, but my experience is that a lot of the contribution margin of a lot of those accounts is really terrible, and the benefits from a strategy perspective are often hard to calculate. Okay, best practice number 2, utilize percentage reductions from current pricing. You should only be willing to take a SPA as a percentage off whatever your current price is, so that the effective price will vary as standard pricing changes. Don't do any price overrides, and don't set as a percentage off a list price that doesn't change. And this is due to Newton's first law of pricing. A SPA in motion tends to stay in motion. So SPAs tend to exist for much longer than the original term, and a deal that isn't constructed as a percentage off the active price tends to look less attractive over time. When I counsel clients on this, I'm often told not to worry because they'll renegotiate when the contract ends. That's not been my experience. And sure, the market may push back on this approach. I didn't say any of this is going to be easy. Right? Okay. Best practice number 3, prioritize off-invoice versus on-invoice adjustments. So for SPAs, off-invoice rebates are almost always better for suppliers than on-invoice discounts. Some organizations, by the way, call this ship and debit. I prefer this for 2 reasons. When you're selling indirectly through a channel, a rebate allows you to request information like a point of sale report from your channel partner confirming where the sale is coming from, so you know the concessions being given for the appropriate account. And then it allows you to ensure thresholds are hit before granting the concession. So if you set up your SPAs correctly, you don't have to pay out until the reasons you agreed to the SPA in the first place have been achieved. Okay? All right. Again, some market players may push back on this. Hold firm when you can. You know, I never said any of this is easy to get done. Best practice number 4, get the right roles in the approver positions. So typically that means someone who understands the market and whose incentives are aligned with those of the company. I once had a CFO tell me that all the really large deals wound up on her desk for approval. And she looked at me and said, how do I know if this makes any sense? I'm not out in the marketplace. So product managers are often best suited to be approvers because they have the right balance of knowing the market and having their incentives properly aligned. You can get a little tricky if there's multiple product managers affected by a deal, but there are ways of addressing that. And lastly, best practice number 5, review performance and adjust regularly. So regularly reviewing spa performance seems obvious, but it's often overlooked. Utilize software tools to manage and analyze spas and establish standard KPIs and a review cadence to continuously learn and improve. And if you notice in your analysis that spas constitute a large portion of your business, ask, are we overusing spas because our pricing is not market appropriate or we're too willing to negotiate? And then adjust accordingly. Okay. Next topic, let's talk about being organizationally aligned. And channel programs have to work with many parts of your organization. For today, I'm just going to highlight 2. So first, the market-facing organization alignment. A lot of organizations combine the roles of managing channel partner relationships with selling to end users. And some of this is because some organizations unfortunately think of channel partners as customers, or it's because for scale reasons. So you don't want them wearing 2 hats. And that's because these are 2 completely different roles. Salespeople who sell to customers ask the question, how can I help you? Channel managers who manage channel relationships ask the question, how can I direct and coach you to our mutual benefit? 2 very different questions. Most individual contributors are not suited to performing both of these, and even if they were, it's really hard to make that work. It's also important that however channel managers are measured and rewarded aligns with the channel reward program. So if it's up to the channel managers to drive towards certain channel partner outcomes, they should be held accountable, or at a very minimum, their measures and rewards shouldn't conflict. Okay, area number 2. If you need to have finance or accounting position to manage the program and analyze performance. If you're heavily rebate-oriented, you need to manage those. I've had clients tell me like that they felt like they had to use discounts because they weren't equipped to manage rebates. So, and it goes without saying, but with like a tool with Enable, finance teams on both sides don't need to work as hard and they'll make a lot fewer mistakes. Okay, we're coming up on the home stretch, last section. So, collaborative. Let's talk about being collaborative. So from a supplier's perspective, one of the major reasons for implementing a program like this is to implement a framework that creates a reason to collaborate with partners. To all the parents of teenagers out there, I'm not sure you've ever had this experience. The other day, I had a rare sighting of our younger son in our kitchen, and I said to him, hey, buddy, would you like to hang out with me tonight and maybe play a little ping pong? And he looked at me and he said, oh, no, man, I'm good. And he just walked back up to his room. I'm sure I just sat there dumbfounded. I mean, how could I not be fun to hang out with when I'm dropping all these pearls of wisdom, which is exactly what most teenagers are looking for. But anyway, that's not acceptable from channel partners. They must be willing to engage with you on the partnership, or they just can't be in your program. But you need to foster the engagement. Okay? So I'm an engineer originally. Some of you may have guessed. So a lot of my clients tend to be manufacturers of technical products. So every time I have a new client that wants me to help them with a commercial program, one of the first things I do is go for a ride in the field with the manufacturer's salespeople to understand those relationships. And if it's a manufacturer that sells through distribution, we'll often have a local distributor rep ride along with us to see customers. Right? So in the past, when I visited customers with the distributor rep would typically graciously introduce us and tell the customer about all the wonderful things my manufacturing client was doing, and we all looked like a team. But about 10 years ago, one of those distributors asked me to do a commercial project for them. And I started by doing what I always do, going out with salespeople and seeing their customers. And one takeaway hit me right in the face. They don't care what they sell, especially the boots on the ground. So as a consultant to manufacturers, I sort of knew this intellectually, but until I went out in the field with just the distributor reps, I didn't actually understand it. So when clients come to me a few years after we implement a new reward program and they tell me that while some distributors are heavily engaged in the program, others don't seem to care, I tell them, you gotta make it easy for them to care, right? So most suppliers with reward programs meet regularly in business review sessions with their distribution partners, and they talk about topics like key performance metrics, whether they're rewarded or not, relationship logistics on things like inventory, marketing programs, open houses, et cetera, or feedback on the manufacturer's products or something they're doing. But the really good organizations provide coaching to their channel partners to get them to engage. So as an example, we don't say, well, you're behind on strategic product sales. You need to sell more of those. We say, hey, I noticed you're a bit behind target on strategic product sales. I want you to get your rebate. I've identified 5 customers that I think are good targets for these specific products. What kind of support would you need from us to approach these companies, and what's the best way to get an action plan in place? Engaging with distributors effectively requires channel managers to be coaches and good business people. So it also requires them to prepare diligently for meetings, because it's not as simple as pulling a report to discuss. The channel manager needs to know the partner and its market before walking into the meeting. Okay, and I'll say this again because I think it bears repeating. Channel management and end user sales are 2 completely different roles. Okay, as I said at the start, this is a journey to an ever-evolving destination. Nobody gets all this stuff right, and there's no one right way to do all this. But if you're thinking that you might want to assess the effectiveness of your current program, a good place to start is to ask the reverse of the strategy questions I outlined at the beginning. Does our reward program drive our channel partners' behavior in a manner that supports our strategic objectives? And if the answer is no, we have people waiting in the wings to help you figure it out. All right, well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Did you want
Any questions from the group? Things you're interested in? Young man in the brown jacket back there. Vigan. She's coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Bart. One of the things that often crosses my mind is being the department or the folk who have to calculate whether to dispose of the rebates. When you go to a off-invoice
rebates.
Like a spa model, how do you justify, or how do you kind of approach management as it relates to the different cost of serve that is involved with that? So because sometimes it requires an enable platform or some other things. So have you gone through?
Well, I mean, it all comes down to the value proposition of switching from discounts to rebates, right? You have to explain the effectivity of the program, that I just can't do this as a discount, or it's really suboptimal, because then I have to have this conversation with my valued partner that says, oh, you were getting 28% off last month, now you're getting 24. Like that's you have to explain the value of doing that. And then we also want to do some things that aren't possible in discounts or really hard to do in discounts. But I mean, if everything you could do, most of my programs are mixed. Like very few of the programs have. Very rarely, all this is aspirational, by the way. We're all trying to push towards this stuff. Very few of these programs have like rebates only. I've gotten there a couple times, but not every time. But it's how do you get there? You have to explain the value of doing it, right? And if you can't make, I would suggest if you can't make a valuable case for why it needs to be done that way, it shouldn't be done that way. Good question. Other questions? Anyone want to argue with me on anything I said? I love that. No? Question up front? My hope is that the next question is all the way over here.
Thanks. So you mentioned earlier quickly that in the before times when you weren't doing rebates and you were doing these discounts, they were winning on price versus value. And I think it's a really important point to talk about when they were lowering the price and they were just offering the lowest price. What some of the impacts could be with the market, price war. So could you just talk a little bit more about when you say winning on price versus value?
Yeah. When I'm talking about that, what I'm referring to is not really about discounts versus rebates. So I'm talking about the net price, whatever it is. So whatever, after all the discounts and then after all the rebates, whatever that is. The example I was giving of that industrial products company, the flow goods products company, was this company had given this large distributor, because they didn't understand how distribution worked. They gave this large distributor an enormous benefit. And they said, well, they're a big customer, which they should not have said, that they're a huge customer, so they deserve a better benefit. And what that allowed this company to do was to start a price war. And since these were, in that particular example, since these were recurring purchases, they let one of these little companies do all the work to sell it. And then they'd say, hey, I can get you this for 20% less. And they just took all the revenue. That's exactly what they did, and we put a stop to it, and that's why they were so mad. But I appreciate the question, because one of the most important things and one of the biggest arguments I get into with clients is you got to give everyone the same program. Too many bad things happen when people have different programs. Even if you think they're similar, they're often not. Things are happening that you don't even really understand. And I know that's aspirational. It doesn't happen that way. Every client I work with has 20%, 80% of their business goes through 20% of their partners. And that's just the Pareto principle law of nature of the way these things work. But you got to aspire to having the same program, and whatever you do. Like I've written programs where they weren't. It was the same, but larger distributors did better. But we structured it in a manner so they couldn't use it for price, right? They only got something when they hit a certain threshold, and it was done in a way that it was only based on the amount over a threshold. Like, I didn't want to do it, but we got in sort of a real situation where, someone said, we're the biggest and, we're the best. The most important thing in a lot of this stuff is don't let your partners compete with each other on price. Like, that's just bad for you. It's just really, really bad for you. Great question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Question in the back? Great.
Thank you so much. Maybe when you're switching from direct distribution to something like in the middle, probably your distributor is doing sales and logistics, but maybe you want to take control of sales and leave them only logistics, or pure taking out the middleman and delivering and doing all the whole thing by yourself. Any advice on that? How do you transition
Absolutely.
from a model?
You say, here's the way the whole go-to-market process, marketing, all the way through, map the whole thing out and say, what do we expect? What are we going to do? What are we going to ask partners in that process? So think of like a bunch of chevrons going across my face right now. For every one of those chevrons, figure out what is it exactly that we're going to do, what are the partners going to do, and most importantly, where is it optional? And for those optional things, associate a value with the channel partner performing those things and put that in the program. So if I'm willing to take on inventory and we've decided, so if the supplier has decided that a partner taking on inventory is a good thing, it's not always, by the way, but if they've decided that it's a good thing for them to take on inventory, there's an investment there for them to make, right? Well, that should be rewarded in the program. People who take in, you got to have rules around it, Usually there's a number of terms, whatever parameters you want to put around that. But map out the process and figure out where you want to be, where you want your channels partners to be, what's optional, and what you're willing to pay for the optional stuff. So I've done things like, you got to find proxies for some of this stuff too. Like, for example, if we want sales, if we want the channel partner to be more involved in the sales process, well, it's kind of hard to measure that. So the way I've done that before is with certification programs, because I know that if we get a certified partner, they're more likely to take up more of the sales process than one that's not certified on average. Does that make sense? I hope that's helpful. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? Great. Well, thank you all for being such a good audience. I appreciate it.